Hello and welcome back to Chris's Granite Paradise. Thanks for joining me today on this second and perhaps a little more in-depth look at southern and central Wyoming's banded iron formation, specifically uh, the rocks I have that were collected at various locations along the North Platte River, basically ranging from about where Glendale Reservoir is and going upstream from there all the way to, I believe it was Seminole Reservoir, Pathfinder Reservoir, and areas along there. I will begin with a short discussion on my view and my thrill that I get with the concept of deep time. When we talk about the time frames involved in these rocks, it's really a thrill for me, and I just want to share my heart with you on that. And then following that will be a longer discussion about various rocks and the geology of the rocks that I have. Some specific things that I want to point out to you guys that I think might be of interest. Thank you again for joining me. God bless you guys as always. Hello and welcome to my office. As I said a few moments ago, I want to share my heart with you about the deep past, whether you come from a scientific mindset or whether you come from a mindset of faith. In my case, I'm an evangelical Christian. But what I have found is you can't dig very deep into these kinds of subjects from one point of view without encountering the other. You may reject it or leave it or accept it, but you will encounter it sooner or later. And so I have I'll try to be brief because I know the video is kind of long that's yet to come here about the banded iron formation. But I have two books here. One I just found at a second-hand store literally just today, and it's obviously about the Big Bang. You can see the beautiful hologram that it has. That's what caught my attention. But what I love about this book, I'm looking forward to reading through it. But it says, "The Complete History of the Universe." Anyway, it's obviously talking about the Big Bang. And in my mind, the Big Bang really lines up with Scripture in a lot of ways, because the Bible says that from nothing, in an instant, God made everything that there is. And I'm like, So to me, science is a good thing. The more we dig and scratch, the more we're going to find out, oh yeah, he was right all along. Now, the other book I have here, of course, is the Bible. This is my Spanish Bible. And I love the Bible. I believe it is fully the Word of God. It is all we need to know in terms of our life, in terms of our relationship with each other, our society, our relationship with God, how to know God through Jesus Christ, salvation, etc., etc. Those are the things we need to know. Okay, this book was never meant, and obviously this book definitely doesn't have the full, it says the complete history of the universe here. But we know that's a pretty thin book to hold the complete history of the universe. And with all respect, this is a very thin book to hold the whole history of the universe. And I look at the Bible as God's instruction manual to us. It is everything we need to know, as I just said. It was never meant for us to try and squash and stuff, like when you're overpacking a suitcase because you're going to the airport in the morning, you're trying to get one more pair of pants in there. The Bible is not meant for that. It's not meant to contain everything our eternal God, who has no beginning and has no end. He has always been creating and will always be creating and is probably creating right now. A lot of things we don't need to know. So this fascinates me. And I see no conflict at all. When I hold a 3 billion year old rock in my hand, that's more of a thrill than drugs can ever give you, I think. To me, that's a rush. This chunk of history right here, a snapshot in time from way long time ago. that stirs my faith even more. It doesn't cause me to doubt, nor do I negate the other. Yeah, I have no problem believing it's what's 3 billion years, what's 4.5 billion years in the history of eternity. It's not even a scratch. King Solomon said that God has put eternity in the hearts of men, but men could not understand it. Men could not fathom what God has done from beginning until end. So that's a desire that's in us, to know and to discover. And I'm all for it. And then geology, astronomy, those kind of sciences, we'll stick with geology because that's the focus of my channel, but it applies to other areas as well. But we're trying to figure things out. We're trying to fathom that eternity that's in our hearts. So that's my take on this subject. My wife reminded me of a very good verse today in Scripture where it says of Jesus' life that if everything he had said and done were written down, the whole world could not contain the books. So let's enjoy discovery and marvel and get that rush, like I said. In this video, I'm going to be holding some really old rocks in my hands, and it's a thrill. So part of what led me to do this second video on banded iron formation is the research I've been doing. I'm finding out that many estimates put this material, specifically speaking of the banded iron formation in Wyoming, and I would imagine all banded iron formation because allegedly most of it or all of it formed when the oceans oxygenated. But the research I've been doing is saying that this occurred roughly 3,700 million years ago, 3.7 billion years. Most of the age of the Earth, according to scientists. So this is a fascinating piece of material. Those of you familiar with plate tectonics, you know that the plates are constantly moving and shifting. The continents have all come together and separated several times, according to the geologic record. And so this piece that I'm holding in my hand has likely been involved in several origins, meaning mountain building events, where blocks of the crust collided and separated. When North America was formed, several of these blocks collided together. And so this material has been buried to great depth, again brought up to the surface, then buried again, likely several times. And so the reason I keep turning it is you'll see that along every axis, along every possible direction you could look at it, it is grossly folded to the point of being tortured, if a rock can be tortured. Most rocks have what we might call corrugated folding. That's not a geologic term, I'm just using it as a comparison. But that's where most of the folds go in one direction. So if you look at the rock from one direction, it has straight lines, and if you look at it across the grain, as it were, then you see the folds. But this one is folded from every which direction. A fascinating piece capturing a lot of history. Here we see a beautiful brecciated pattern in banded iron formation. You can clearly see each of those small pieces still preserves the original layering. It's the pure iron variety, and then it's in a reddish matrix. But you just have to ask yourself, what went on down there to cause shattering of this intensity to occur and then resolidification somewhere along its epic journey. Let's talk about magnetism. I brought these 4 rocks out here to show you guys a couple of things. The first thing is, we know that banded iron formation is iron. And then the question is, why isn't all of it magnetic? For example, this piece here, get our little handy magnet out. It's actually very magnetic. That magnet is hard to pull off of there. We come over to this one, which this one here is borderline. It's right on the outside. It has some banded iron maybe there in the middle. It's not magnetic at all. This beautiful red piece is what I would call slightly magnetic. If I'm not careful, the magnet will fall off. Now this one is one that I've always said is just pure iron. It's pure black. Very nice piece actually, but the magnet won't stick to it at all. So the question is, why? Well, there are various iron oxides. The most common ones are magnetite, which, as its name implies, is extremely magnetic. And then another common one is hematite. And I believe there are several others. So it's an interesting subject, but really magnetite is the one that's magnetic. And it just depends how many oxygen atoms are attached to the iron. They're all equally good in their iron content, and I would like to mention that I believe 60% of the world's iron mines or iron deposits are being mined in banded iron formation, because banded iron formation is actually found all over the world in huge deposits. I mean, it was the oceans, for crying out loud. So there's a lot of it, and that's where we get a lot of our iron. Banded iron formation has a variety of colors and patterns, and it really ranges from pretty much jet black, pure iron oxide, either hematite or magnetite. And even the black varieties still show the layering, but they're black. There really isn't much jasper in them. And then they grade all the way down to this specimen here, which is almost just a hunk of jasper. But you can kind of see the bedding and the evidence of banded iron with it. And it was found in the same area with the banded iron. And it basically grades everywhere in between. And what most people seem to look for is a nice combination of the orange or red or brown or whatever the case may be, and the black, because it makes a very nice, striking appearance, and that's what collectors look for. Here we see beautiful evidence of not only folding, but faulting. You can see where the rock was under such strain, under a certain amount of strain, the rock bends, it folds. But if the strain is too much, as you can see here, the rock actually snaps. And those are called faults. And of course, large faults cause earthquakes, and little tiny faults like this maybe weren't felt. Maybe they were part of bigger earthquakes, we really don't know. But this rock has been shattered by just overwhelming pressure. We could almost say that this is a miniature example of what scientists call thrust faulting, which is where a rock is being pushed from one direction and the rock from behind is sliding up over the rock in front. And of course, on a large scale, this produces whole mountain ranges, such as in the northwestern United States. Northwestern Montana, I believe, has a lot of thrust faulting. But on a miniature scale, we can kind of see here where the rock pushed from one direction, and every single one of those little faults slides in the same direction. Here's another piece showing that same folding right on the verge of thrust faulting feature that we saw in the other piece. See how close I can get away with. The first time I ever saw a banded iron formation was in Casper, Wyoming. Our kids were little. We were driving up to Montana to visit family and friends up there. We had just recently moved here to Fort Collins, Colorado. And we stopped where the interstate just leaves Casper on the west end. There's a little park there, a little pull-off area right next to the North Platte River. And we got out and we're kind of looking at a little gravel bar that was there. And I thought we were hitting the jackpot on petrified wood, because a lot of the pieces were kind of elongated and they looked like petrified wood, and they kind of have a wood grain. Beautiful material. And it wasn't until quite a while later that I found out that they were banded iron. I'm showing here some petrified wood from the Yellowstone River. Of course, we're probably all familiar with how wood breaks along the grain. You know, we've all seen or done it ourselves, where you take an axe and set a log up on a stump and whack it, and it splits so easily along the grain. But of course, wood will not break across the grain, and that's why we can use it to build our houses, and it's actually extremely strong across the grain. Well, banded iron, the reason a lot of the pieces, obviously not all, but the reason we do commonly find kind of elongated, we use this as an example. I wet it so you can see the color's good on the end. So looking at it around the edge, you could think, wow, that's a nice piece of petrified wood. Why do they break like this? Well, if you look at the end on this piece, you'll see that it's folded. In fact, it's actually a nice tight fold. It looks like the letter Z. And obviously this is not wood, and the atoms or molecules in the stone don't have a grain, as in the case of wood. So what gives it its strength? It has slightly more strength along the grain, or I'm sorry, across the grain as it does along the grain. I hope I'm saying that right, in the right order. Here's another piece here that's kind of elongated. Again, if you turn it, let me get it wet. These look so much nicer when they're wet. So looking across the grain, as it were, again, we see beautiful folds. And then if we look along the length of the rock, the lines are straight. And again, this piece is kind of elongated. And I would say more common than not. But of course, a lot of banded iron formation is folded along multiple axes, and so you don't get this effect. This really only works if the folds are going in one direction, kind of like corrugated metal. And what I'm thinking is going on, you guys may have comments. Of course, we know what cardboard is and what gives cardboard its strength. So here we're looking along, this is like the rocks I was just holding. If we turn it this way, we could say the lines are straight. But if you look across the grain, what do they do to the cardboard to give it such strength? It's just another piece of paper in the middle there that's corrugated. And so this, if I had both hands free, this cardboard very easily bends this way, but it's a lot harder to bend across the grain. That's why it has such strength that way. So I hope that helps you understand why maybe some of you watching this video, you have this beautiful pile of kind of reddish, real heavy petrified wood. Well, it may very well be banded iron formation. Here's another piece. Again, along the edges, the banding is kind of straight. And on the end, there's just a little bit of corrugation in this one. Let's get that baby wet. They always look better wet. This one, if I remember right, has a lot of nice folding, nice pattern to it. Get it all the way wet. Hope that's showing in the video. There we go. Very solid piece. Yeah, it's got some folding on the end. And I think that might explain why that piece is long. Anyway, I hope that helps, that little educational explanation for you. Here are a couple of pieces that really show nicely what I was referring to when I showed the cardboard with the corrugated layer in the middle of the cardboard, giving it its strength. Both of these pieces show the actual surface, if I can call it that, showing a very nice corrugation. So if you look on the end here, you see very light folding, and the folding is only along one axis, and so on the actual surface it looks like maybe you could imagine a piece of corrugated metal. This is another piece that shows the same effect of the corrugation. Here we are looking at what could have very well been the surface at one time. Then looking across the end, again you see the folding. So anyway, going back to our cardboard, this corrugation, I believe, is what gives just enough more strength to the stone that it ends up breaking with that tendency to look like petrified wood. And to the contrary of what I was saying about the petrified wood appearance, it's relatively rare. In fact, this might be the only piece I have where a piece breaks totally across the grain and across the folds rather than along it. However, there is evidence in this rock that shows why it broke this way. You can see there's another fissure in the stone, not necessarily parallel, but my guess is that this rock had some fissures in it, fault lines, which we saw earlier, and this simply broke along the fault lines. And I personally treasure these pieces because for the size of the rock, they show you a lot of character, because the whole face of the rock is cross-grained rather than along the grain. So instead of seeing straight lines on the broad face, you're seeing a beautiful pattern. So I value these when I find them. This would be another one of those relatively rare samples where it breaks across the folds rather than along them. So you can see along the narrow side of the rock, you're actually looking along the grain. And on the broad face, we have a good view of all the action. I must confess that I have a special preference for the really river smoothed pieces with very straight grains that look like wood. Kind of the appearance of petrified wood is a special look to me. This piece is really nice. Hope you can appreciate the grain there, if I could call it that. Water truly makes everything pop in terms of color. So in this video, of course, we're talking about banded iron, and I've mentioned that it's everything I have is collected along the North Platte River. And I've been one to leave comments on YouTube channels that, for example, of the Yellowstone River, they're collecting agates. But they only talk about the agates, and they don't they'll be right next to, especially when they're walking along the river picking up rocks, and I'll be like, oh, pick up that rock. What's this other one, this porphyry? Look at that beautiful porphyry right there. And they won't see it. So I want to at least give a few minutes here looking at some of the beautiful petrified woods, sandstones, granites, a lot of rocks that are probably similar in age to the banded iron. Probably these sandstones are a lot younger, but some of these granites were probably uplifted in some of those mountain building events that I mentioned. There we go, now I can see. It's hard to see in the bright sun. A lot of these I don't know what they are. They're just jaspers, petrified woods. This appears to be epidote in quartz. It's a very pretty rock, actually. Here we have some more petrified wood. Make sure I'm getting it in focus here. Someday I might do a longer video just about these other rocks, but for now I just want you guys to see what else is out there. There's some really neat stuff. Quartzites, sandstones. All right, let's go to the other stash I've put out for you guys. So again, me having my background in the granite business, over the years, whenever I'd go up there, I'd pick up interesting, what I call granitoids. So they're rocks that are similar to granite. They might be something else. I'm sure they have other geologic names. A few that I want to point out here is this beautiful, it appears to be just epidote quartz. What is that called? Epidocite, I think. Here's a beautiful version of a unikite. This one caught my eye, and I've only found one. It's extremely yellow. That's got to be the yellowest granite that I've ever seen. I'm not sure what would cause that. I broke an end off just because I wanted to see if the yellow went through, and sure enough it does. It's really a nice piece. I kind of wish I would have cut it instead of broken it. Here's a nice agate that it looks like, well, you know, I'm not even going to try to guess. It's solid on the back. That's what's holding it together. But instead of the agate filling the crack, the agate actually makes up the box, the box structure, which I thought was interesting. And then you can still see some of the limestone in there eroding out. This is a piece of granite with magnetite. Very interesting to find magnetite in its matrix like that. And this one appears to be, I almost want to say it's like a volcanic porphyry or an intrusive dike. It could be. It looks somewhat porphyritic and very fine grain. Not too many of these. Almost everything is either sandstones, limestones, or granites. Here's a beautiful sandstone. Actually, that's probably more likely a quartzite, which of course was sandstone before, but it's lightly metamorphosed and still conserves a lot of the pattern embedding. Another breccia. And these are common. These are limestone with basically jasper or chert, maybe flint. And of course, the latter is harder, and so the limestone erodes away, leaving these very unique forms. I want to show this little piece because in the last video I showed it wet, and so you really couldn't appreciate the crystals in the middle. So this is obviously banded iron, and it had a fault in it that separated enough for fresh mineral to move in, probably magnetite or hematite, but it's more of a crystalline form. I'm not sure if you can appreciate the little sparkles, but it's more grainy. So at some point during the rock's development, that was later injected. I just thought that's an interesting piece. And this on the back here is what we call caliche, which is basically calcium carbonate from being buried in a gravel bed somewhere for a very long time. And then when the rocks are eroded, that dissolves in the rain and they take on their original form. And of course, as you get closer to the source where the material originates, you can find these much larger, boulder size, really rough pieces that definitely show the pattern, but in my opinion not as nicely as the river washed pieces or the ventifacts, just because they have a lot of roughness to them. But they look like big logs basically, because they also tend to break in an elongated fashion. I want to conclude showing off a beautiful Ventifact that I have. I actually bought this from a gentleman at the Gem and Mineral Show in Billings, Montana, and he told me it was from Wyoming. And I have since seen them from Wyoming. Still none really quite this nice. He wouldn't give me a location, and I fully understand why, but I've seen lots of ventifacts in Wyoming, including of this material, so I have no doubt in what he said. Beautiful polish on it. And as is customary with ventifacts, this is what we call fluting. This rock sat in the same place for a very long time. If we turn the rock over, it's completely rough, as is the case with a lot of ventifacts. Sometimes you find rocks that are ventifacted, if I can coin that term. I don't know if that's a correct English or not, but all the way around, which means at some point they got turned over and the process continued. But many of them are rough on the bottom. If you're interested, I do have another full-length video on ventifacts, and I may be doing another one soon because I've collected more since then and I've learned a little more since then. But I just wanted to show this to you guys. This is not wet. I'm showing it to you dry on purpose so you can see what a beautiful polish it has taken. Well, I hope you guys have enjoyed this show and tell time here at Granite Paradise, and that you'll consider stopping by sometime. It's always fun to talk about rocks, and there's plenty more to look at where these came from. God bless you guys. We'll see you on the next one.